Want to welcome to the program Dr. David Rainey, Associate Professor of History at Hillsdale College. Dr. Rainey, good evening to you, sir.
Well, good evening to you too, Cam. Good to be back.
Well, thanks very much for coming with us once again as we delve into some American history. And I don't know if the Smithsonian Museum of American History actually tweeted about this today. I did see they were tweeting on this day in history about a couple of other items, but I did not see them mention the midnight ride of Sybil Ludington, which maybe a lot of people know about the midnight ride of Paul Revere, but I'm guessing Sybil Ludington, a much less familiar name in American history.
That is correct, absolutely. But ironically enough, she did many of the same things that Paul Revere did a little bit later. For those who don't know about Sybil Ludington, she was actually the daughter of a colonel who served in the French and Indian War. And at the ripe old age of 16, in April of 1777, she actually went on a midnight ride of her own from her hometown in New York. And she basically alerted a number of the local militiamen to the fact that the British were moving to Danbury, Connecticut. They were attempting to, sounds like a familiar story, they were attempting to seize firearms and ammunition that the militia had stored there. And although in her 40-mile or so ride, she wasn't able to prevent Danbury from being burned, she was able to gin up about 400 militiamen who actually assembled back on her property, and they were able to move against the British, who had finished their work at Danbury and were trying to invade New York. And as a consequence of her actions and the militia forces she raised, the British were actually pushed back all the way to Long Island, actually, to where their boats were at anchor, and they were prevented from marauding the New York countryside. So she was immediately, of course, hailed as a hero, understandably so, for the Patriot cause. And according to legend, George Washington learned of her activities and provided her with a commendation. So certainly a great chapter in the Patriot history of the war.
Absolutely. Now, I suppose some detractors might say, look, she was 16. That's like 40 in American Revolution years. You know, I mean, by the time she was 16, she already would have been married, had a couple of kids. So, you know, it wasn't like she was an adolescent or a teenager doing this.
That's a very good point. Actually, she did wait to get married until after the war. I think she was all of 23 years old, which yes was a little long in the tooth, I guess, at that point for getting married. But you're right. At age 16, she had obviously seen a lot around her father's mill, and she was by no means an ingenue who didn't know anything about the world, and she actually ended up having to grow up a bit on that midnight ride that she took. Apparently, she was held up by a highwayman and was able to defend herself using her father's musket and put him to flight. So,
say what now? Hang on here. Wait. There was an armed citizen component to the Sybil Ludington story, Dr. Rainey?
Yes, there was. She actually took her father's musket with her on the ride for protection, and when a highwayman tried to hold her up, she leveled it at him, apparently, and he thought better of trying to take advantage of her, so she was able to continue on her merry way.
So is this...
But yes, things like that tend to make somebody grow up, and of course, the experience of wartime, as we all know, it has the same effect. It forces people to mature, sometimes under very harsh circumstances.
Absolutely. So is this progress now that, the idea of a 16-year-old defending herself with a rifle against a highwayman would strike some with horror today, and yet back then that was worthy of praise?
It certainly was, absolutely, and it was second nature, of course, for her, and nobody gave it a second thought. It was perfectly understandable that somebody would protect him or herself from bodily harm. It was something that the folks just took as a matter of course.
One of the things that struck me about this, when Sybil Ludington made her ride, it was 1777, so independence had already been declared. You had a very young United States of America. She didn't have to do this. She wasn't a member of the Continental Army. Maybe there was obviously her sense of duty compelled her to do this, but I wonder, do we see a lot of this? Was there a lot of ancillary effort from Americans who didn't perhaps formally serve in the Continental Army who still, were working for the cause of independence?
Absolutely. Yes, indeed. Actually, a lot of civilians were associated with not only the militias, but of course the Continental Army. A lot of civilians were put to use providing various resources to the Army, giving them provisions, acting as guides and scouts, in some cases doing manual labor for the armed forces. But an important component of all this, which Sybil Ludington helps to, I think, shed light on, was the question of female involvement, the involvement of women in this conflict. And it brings to mind the story of individuals who are known as camp followers. These were women who would actually follow the troops from location to location, often providing very important services that the Army at that time simply couldn't provide for itself. Now, of course, our armed forces are well provisioned. Sometimes we might think not maybe as well as they should be in some cases, but compared to 1775, 1777, we definitely have a leg up today. But in those days, the Army didn't have the auxiliary services it has today. Mm-hmm. It didn't have the type of supply chain that it has now. And so basic services like, for example, having laundry done, or even preparing meals, or tending to the sick or the wounded, those are things that the Army simply was not prepared for at the outbreak of the Revolutionary War. And so women, many of them who were left behind because their fathers or brothers went off to war, they would often accompany their male relatives on the trail, and they would actually they would spend time in camp, and they would actually perform some of these vital services, whether it was doing laundry or cooking for the men, ministering to the needs of those who were sick or wounded. These were essential services that the Army, quite frankly, wasn't able to take care of itself.
Absolutely. And, you know, did those, I mean, again, it's so foreign to us now. Did those women ever get acknowledged? And I guess I got to ask as well, you know, when I hear the term camp follower, Dr. Rainey, I always think of the more sordid side of the camp followers. Was that aspect at work in the Continental Army as well?
Well, yes, there was some of that, no doubt. We don't want to whitewash the portrait of American history. There certainly was some of that, both in the Revolutionary War, but also in the Civil War, of course, notorious in the northern camps with General Joseph Hooker, for example, with the ladies who followed his camps, and of course we know what term we derive from that. But yes, some of that went on, but more importantly, the vast majority of women who performed these vital tasks for the soldiers, they were doing legitimate things the Army could not, quite frankly, do for itself, things that were welcomed by the men. And I would point out that one of the most important of these camp followers actually was, of all people, Martha Washington. Martha Washington accompanied George, her husband, during the harsh winter of 1777, 1778 at Valley Forge. Martha joined Washington there, and she wasn't just a socialite. She actually organized women, many of whom were related to the men who were in camp, and they did mundane chores such as the laundry, such as taking care of the sick and the wounded soldiers in the camp, things of that sort. So yes, you certainly have to acknowledge the occasional sordid activity. Some of these women were often accused of, I shouldn't say often, but occasionally accused of maybe stealing small items here or there. But all of that was certainly was more than offset by the legitimate activities these women were involved with on a regular basis.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Dr. Rainey, I can't thank you enough, sir, for coming back on the program for another History File. Hope we can do this again soon, and thank you so much for your time tonight, sir.
Well, it was my pleasure, and feel free to call upon me anytime. It's really an honor, sir.